So, good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to this panel on new regional perspectives, the role of gas in the transition to a lower carbon economy in the MENA region. I'm Halima Croft, Managing Director and Head of Commodity Strategy at the Royal Bank of Canada. We have an all-star lineup here to discuss the outlook for gas in the Middle East. Directly next to me, we have His Excellency Tariq Al-Mala, Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources, Arab Republic of Egypt. Next to him, we have His Excellency Yuri Senchurin, Secretary General, Gas Exporting Countries Forum. Then we have Fatima Al-Nuaimi, CEO, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, LNG. Then we have Gerald Stockman, EVP, Joint Ventures, Royal Dutch Shell. Directly next to him, Majid Jafar, CEO, Crescent Petroleum. Oliver Lepouche, CEO, Schlumberger Limited. And then finally, last but not least, Saji Sam, partner, Oliver Wyman Group. I thought for the first question, we would actually take a play on the title, which the question is essentially, what is the role of gas in the transition to a lower carbon economy in the MENA region? So Fatima, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Okay.
What is the role?
Okay. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. I don't know, Halima, if you've noticed that in most energy events that are taking place these days, gas takes a front seat, even those titled oil.
Yes.
And I think that's an indication of the role that natural gas is playing in the world, and it's getting increasingly important role. Now, we know that demand for energy globally, not just in the MENA region, is continuously growing. People are getting access to electricity, population is increasing. Everybody is targeting a certain standard of living that really requires energy. And regardless of the cycles of economy, the longer term trend is always upwards. And among this, you have governments and companies trying to crack the code of the optimum energy mix that provides them with security, that is reliable, that is also reduces the emissions and the impact on the environment. And here comes the role of gas, as it's proven that it is less in terms of greenhouse emissions. And that's not just me as LNG or gas producer giving a promotion for our product. That's in fact a trend that you see, an inverse relationship between the greenhouse emissions whenever the gas is increasing in the energy mix. And the MENA region is going to be, because of the youth and the increase in population, in fact, second to the Asian region in terms of growth and demand in energy and gas. And today, you see natural gas in abundance. Availability is there, especially after the shale gas revolution. Accessibility is there. We see countries tapping into floating storage and regasification units, tapping into LNG until they realize the potential of their local resources. Some of them never get over the LNG and they get addicted to it and becomes part of their energy mix in the longer term, like we've seen Kuwait, for example, and transferring from the FSRU into land-based terminals. So longer term, I can see that natural gas with renewable will be leading the way in terms of energy mix.
Your Excellency, Minister?
I do echo what Ms. Fatma was saying, actually, and this is the time of the green energy. And when we say that we need green energy, of course, the theme now is renewables and so forth, but we should not forget that all the time we will need to have a base load. So when we talk about base load, so we need still hydrocarbons, but when we talk about the efforts done globally, because this is not a unique or an effort that should be carried by one region or one country, it should be carried out by all the world. Therefore, when we talk about the transformation, then we look about the most effective and most green transformative energy, which should be gas. What happens that recently we see that we've been blessed. God has given us this resource of gas, and what we need to do, and when we talk about MENA region, is really how to optimize and how to cooperate for the development of this discoveries and these capabilities that we have for gas. And the idea, in my opinion, is how to use technology and how to be able to cooperate all together to be able, at the end of the day, to use technology in order to make this gas affordable. And as discussed, as explained earlier, having this facilities, let us say, of floating LNGs, floating storage as well. What we need is to have as well this on a master scale that can be helped together for East region. We have started, we as in Egypt, together with our East Mediterranean countries, neighboring countries, to establish somehow a forum by which we can then use our synergies in order to develop these resources using the infrastructure that is existing, or to collaborate together in future development of infrastructure. And why is that? The idea is to accelerate the development of gas. In order to reach the position and to reach the ultimate goal is to have the more friendly resource, more friendly fuel, and this is gas. And the idea is to make it, as I say, more affordable. And this will be done when we all together understand the economics of this development. So I think that when I started saying that we are blessed, I think that we are blessed, and therefore we need to smartly develop this resource, as I mentioned, in order to see that as we talk, the coming few years is the era of the gas. Thank you.
Olivier, any thoughts on this?
Yes, I think I agree with what I heard before. The fact that gas in MENA is an obvious transition fuel for energy mix is established. No question about it. I think the region is gifted with a lot of resource, gas resource, but I think there are a couple of challenges I think we need to overcome as an industry. All these resources are not born equal, as I would say. And some of them are tight, some of them are deep water, some of them are sour or deep and hot. And I think to find the scale of exploitation of this resource so that it becomes affordable, transition or long-term fuel that will participate and dominate the energy mix here in MENA is not there yet. And I think despite the large discovery, and I think Egypt has been highly successful, I think we need to more work as an industry to have fit solution for every basin, for every resource play, every gas basin, and put them to scale so that we can exploit this, make it an energy mix, part of the energy mix, and then it is not only a transition fuel, it is a long-term fuel here in the region. because I believe that there is one more benefit that the gas can bring beyond its lower carbon footprint, is that it also serves a feedstock for some industry, and it will, by serving the feedstock, help reduce the cost, local domestic cost of the industry, and hence support development in this country. So the future is bright for gas.
Majid, you're shaking your head. Is the future bright?
No, I'm nodding actually.
Nodding.
I'm not shaking. I'm in full agreement. And just to pick up on some of the challenges. So from a private sector perspective here in the Middle East on gas, the region has about half the world's gas resources, and yet we're producing only about a sixth. So we're still punching way below our weight. And there are various challenges. One is infrastructure. You know, we don't have enough of the pipelines and terminals, and in many areas where gas really takes off, the sector is subdivided so that there are different investor regimes for those other sectors, the midstream, for example, so that upstream players don't have to do it all, and that's more effective for the government. Second, of course, we can't ignore geopolitics.
Right.
And it's really, you know, at one of the worst times ever probably in our region at the moment. And yet other regions have shown, and even this region has shown, an ability to put energy to one side and depoliticize it and maintain long-term cooperation on energy, even though the geopolitics might change. And I think that's very important. Thirdly is the policy, and that doesn't get enough of a focus and a debate. Our region is still behind, particularly with gas-focused exploration. Most of the gas that we have discovered, including Qatar's North Field, was discovered looking for oil. In order to really develop the gas, the two areas need policy reform. One is on the downstream prices. We still have half the world's energy subsidies, and electricity prices is a big one, and that goes up the chain. And the other one is on the upstream incentives, having contract models that actually work for natural gas, not just oil, including on price transparency, long-term off-taker agreements. These all need addressing if our region is really to step up and meet its potential for natural gas.
Yuri, your thoughts on this?
So, as you say, generally, I would like to say that in GCF we share the opinion expressed by my colleagues. Saying more specifically, I would like that in GCF we even more determined, saying that the role of natural gas in the transition period will be of paramount significance and to some extent even decisive. So, in compliance with the Global Gas Outlook, that is the flagship production of GCF Secretariat on the basis of Global Gas Model, we forecast that by 2040 the natural gas will be the only fossil fuel which will increase its share in the global energy mix from 22% for the time being up to 26% by 2040. Speaking about the recent years, I can say that the recent years, without no doubt, have been completely productive for natural gas industry, and the industry has succeeded in adapting, in evolving, and as well as in going through some cycles and changes. 2018 showed that the natural gas demand globally increased by astonishing 4.5%, in absolute figures for 170 billion of cubic meters. All these figures and statistics, from our point of view, say or suggest that natural gas, there's something like a golden age for natural gas. And this golden age is based on the natural credentials of this fossil fuel, being abundant, being flexible, being affordable, being viable, and being environmentally friendly fossil fuels. This mentioned credentials, this is the solid basis for the further development of natural gas. The drawback of the current situation that the people, the communities, the industry is not aware completely, comprehensively of the mentioned, described, highlighted credentials of natural gas. This is the responsibility of our organization.
Gerald, golden age?
Yes, I think a golden age and much more to come, I guess. The role of the gas is, I think, very clear. If you look at the lights over here and the fact that it's nicely cold over here and these screens, it's all electricity, it all comes from gas. And there's lots of opportunity to have more electrification in the society, and we're now probably kind of, well, 90% of the electricity here comes from gas, I guess. Most of the demand for energy, 20% currently can be electrified, maybe 30%, so there's a lot to go for. But then there's 70% which is not easily electrifiable, and you need to find another choice for that. Now, I guess that, and it was already said, that if you have the choice out of coal or diesel, then gas is probably the most clean fuel you have available. And if you can have a choice between regional gas or gas which comes from fire, which you need to import, clearly it has to be national or regional gas, given distances, given security of supply, and so on and so forth. So the role of gas in MENA, I think, is indeed kind of up to coming to the golden age. But I think the role of gas is more than that. I think society will find ways and means to electrify more and to kind of do more in the electrification space. And solar will be a great help. And in some places in the world, it will be wind, and there may be other sources as well. But the sun doesn't shine every hour of the day, and the wind doesn't blow every month of the year. So you need a partnering fuel to go with that package, because ultimately we as customers simply would like to have affordable gas, which is convenient, which I can rely on, less geopolitical kind of influence, and which is clean and low carbon. And I think gas as partnering fuel is the second part of the golden age you talked about, and may there be many years to come.
And Saji?
It's always difficult to answer when, the same question. When I think I completely agree with all my fellow panelists. I think the fact that gas has a fundamental role to play in the transition to a lower carbon energy mix globally is a given. And as some of my colleagues said, it is a transition fuel. It is still a fossil fuel, it is a transition fuel, but the fact that it's going to be a lower carbon footprint fuel. I think globally, the fundamental transition will happen with replacing coal. Specific to the MENA region, or the Middle East and the GCC region, coal is not a primary source of thermal generation, so therefore it is not as much an impact as it would be globally. However, I have to say that I've been in the region for almost a decade, and I've seen that the role of liquids in power generation has been significant. Now, I have to say that it's been significant, but also, on the same side of the coin, I have to say that it has been significantly reducing the burning liquids for power generation. Now, I think the first point that we need to have in the Middle East is to completely eliminate liquid burning and replace it by gas, and through that you have a big change in terms of energy, lower carbon footprint. The other thing that I've also noticed in the last 1 decade is that there has been a significant gas flaring. Now, gas flaring has been, it's a criminal waste, I would say. And again, it's been reducing. And to a large extent, a lot of the countries have eliminated gas flaring, but it is not completely eliminated if you look at the larger Middle Eastern regions. So again, gas flaring has to completely eliminate. I think that's, again, will contribute significantly to reducing the carbon footprint. And last but not least, I think Mr. Gerard already mentioned that, I think the biggest role in gas going forward is not to play a base load, or the fossil fuel should not be playing a base load in the energy mix of electricity, but rather as more and more renewables come into the picture, variable renewables come into the picture, you need a fuel that can switch on and switch off quickly. And compared to coal, compared to oil, and compared to gas, I think gas is the fuel that can do that most efficiently. So I think it's very critical for the Middle East, again, to absorb and adapt gas into its energy mix in a big way.
Thank you. Your Excellency, I wonder if we could now sort of dive a little more deeply into the Egypt case study, and if you can talk about sort of the incredible transformation that we've seen in the Egyptian story from, the importer story to now the export story, self-sufficiency. What has really been the key catalyst for this transition in terms of policy, and what are the challenges that still really remain ahead?
Thank you. Well, to start with, we have to say that it is commitment and perseverance. We draw the roadmap and we saw that there is a gap. And in the year, let us say, between 2011 and 2013, we had two change of regimes, we had instability, we had insecurity, then this was reflected immediately on the level of investments of the IOCs in Egypt. Hence, after 2014, when stability started and political stability, this is the first thing that you look at, a place where you should invest. Political stability and security. Then, as I say, when we draw the map, the roadmap for what we should do while closing a gap, because immediately, as I said, during this time, our IOCs really reduced their investments. Hence, we saw a sharp decline in our gas production. Then we started immediately to close the gap by importing LNG. So the first thing is to work closely with our strategic partners, our strategic IOCs who believed in what we were doing in reforms. So we worked in parallel, policy reform, and we worked on the economic model, and we saw how the pricing of our offshore gas was doing and what is needed in order to retain or to attract more IOCs. The second thing was how we had accumulated significant IOCs arrears, overpayment, overdues, more than $6 billion. So we started to reschedule and to focus on how to reduce these arrears back again to a level that would be acceptable for IOCs. Third was to see what are the approvals and the permits and the bureaucratic procedures and processes that are delaying the process of the development. So at the same time, full engagement of the our well-known local EPC contractors with the full support of the leadership and the government in order to make sure that no further delays, no further bureaucratic steps to be carried in order to get approvals and permits to get the project executed. At the same time, and this was focused for the discovered fields already. We wanted to accelerate those discovered fields. But at the same time, we continued on inviting and calling for bid rounds with the new terms that as I explained. So all together with one important thing, which was the energy and the subsidy reform.
Yes.
We were heavily subsidizing energy in Egypt, whether it was for electricity or for fuels, and we took it over 5 years to gradually move from a heavily subsidized to removing subsidy, and now we reached a full coverage of the expense or the cost of fuels, which is a major achievement. Having said so, this meant several indicators. It meant that we are not just consuming without rationale, so we were now consuming with rationale exactly the fuel that we need. Number two, it sent the good and right message that whatever we sell, we were able to collect and we were able to repay to our IOCs. Number three, we were able as well to develop an important IMF program that supported the reform program that we were doing. And having the IMF with us was also a sign of comfort to investors and IOCs. We successfully completed the program. It was a 3-year program, and we were able to deliver what we promised so far regarding the economy in general, but among which was the subsidy reform for energy. We were able as well through this, let us say, 3-4 years to have newcomers, new IOCs, because what happened is that among the work that we've done, here comes a mega discovery, Zohr. With the mega discovery Zohr in August 2015, we were able to put together with INE the plan of development that developed the gas in 28 months. So from the time of discovery to market was only 28 months. 28 months for an offshore discovery, 220 kilometers offshore the borders, the shores of Egypt in the Mediterranean, with depth of about 2 kilometers of depth of water. I think that this was a big and world record to execute. Having had the first gas in December 2017 was like a sign of seriousness and commitment of Egypt and the government towards doing such important projects and towards IOCs. And since then, really, we have been approached and we've been able to attract the attention of different investors and definitely IOCs that were not operating in Egypt. And investors, because as we said, we worked on policy reform, so investors that were interested in investing in the value chain of the gas. So we are having as well a new regulatory gas, independent gas regulator, and we have issued also a law that would allow independent and investors and entrepreneurs to come into all the value chain of the gas, which was only for state companies. And it was like a lobby from the state companies to operate and to deal with the gas value chain. Now it is open for independent and entrepreneur and private sector to join this business opportunities. Since last year, and when we were able to accelerate all these projects, and among which was the most important was Zohr, we were able to reach the self-sufficiency by September 2018 after importing, I would tell you, over the years in year 15, 16, and 17, more than 8 million tons of LNG. And now, as I said, closing this gap, resuming exports from one of our facilities in EDCO, LNG plant, resumed exports to Jordan by pipeline, and now through what we've created, which is the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, we are also cooperating with the eastern neighboring countries to have together to optimize the gas resource that we have offshore still, to optimize and to capitalize on the existing infrastructure in order to have again the possibility of accelerating this resource that we have in order to use it to our people in the region and to monetize it and at the end of the day, to let our people feel let us say the well-being and the welfare of this resource, because it is useless to have a gas offshore under the water without using it. So the idea is to cooperate all together again. So I just wanted to reiterate what we started at the beginning in the opening, that this is the era of gas.
Gas for prosperity.
Exactly.
Now, Fatima, could you talk about the master plan that ADNOC has undertaken on gas?
Well, ADNOC went through a huge transformation as a whole the past few years. And if anybody one day chooses to write a book on this experience of transformation, I think the transformation in the gas sector needs to be a chapter by itself. And just as early as beginning of 2016, I was in the role of looking into the gas master plan, and the picture was not pretty. The graphs that we were looking at were all in the red, showing a shortage. And as a national oil company, our obligation is to satisfy the local demand. Demand was very high to be met by the resources. And yet it didn't make sense, because we have one of the highest gas reserves. We were thinking of closing our export facilities of LNG by 2025. And I think I'm lucky that this changed. It wouldn't have been exciting to be in this role if that was the case. So that was the picture then. It took few decisions, and it's really decision and changes in mindset, because in this region, it's a fact that gas was always looked at as a byproduct. And although it's painful to think of the demand and but still it's in the mindset of an oil producing company or country that this is a byproduct. So the main decisions that were made, mainly reform of the gas prices to reflect its real value. And that's applicable to all sectors that utilize gases. And that switched that mindset. So things were taken for granted, gas was taken for granted, and now it's got a value that transformed the demand curve, and people became rational. It also encouraged the utilization of other sources of energy, hence what we've heard this morning about the vision of 2050 and the energy mix, and solar and renewable becoming 50% of the energy mix in the longer term. So this in terms of the demand side. And on the supply side, it also encouraged that we tap into possibly previously not an economical source of gas, because changes in prices attracted partnership, attracted us to look into these new sources. So now we have the sour gas fields being developed. In fact, we have one of the largest mega projects already developed, which is Shah field. We have the Ghashak concession, which is quite an interesting project because it's an environmentally protected area. It's in shallow water. It's got its challenges technically, yet it's possible because of the decisions that were made. So there were these factors that made it possible for this gap and this picture to change into green. And that's why the announcement came during last EDIPIC that we are, in fact, transforming into a self-sufficiency and ultimately possibly becoming a net exporter in the longer term. So this is, in short, the story of Abu Dhabi. Now, at the same time, ADNOC is of course aware that we have an obligation towards the emissions. So there is a focus on the reduction of our flaring, in fact, 75%, I think, the reduction since the 90s in terms of flaring. The project that Dr. Sultan mentioned, which is the carbon capture and injection, so that it complements each other. But with all this effort put to, let's say, untap gas resources, that does not really conflict in case with the fact that its share in the energy mix is going to reduce. Today, yes, the room is cold because of natural gas. It's almost 100% of gas, but 38%, I think that's the 2050 picture. This will free up the gas to be utilized in industry, and we have ambitious plans for petrochemical and turning Ruwais into one of the leading industrial cities. And of course, keeping the LNG running for longer.
Now, we've heard of the policy successes. Imagine when we talk about Iraq, I mean, it has this enormous gas endowment. How does it fit into the story? And you really have emphasized so much the need for getting the policies correct. How does this story sort of unfold in Iraq?
So I think despite all the differences within the region, there are these common themes. Yeah. And actually the points that Fatma just made are exactly right. It takes the right decisions on policy to encourage that development. And because the national oil companies have been focused mainly on oil, as she said, there's real room for the private sector to play its role, I believe, in all the different parts of the gas value chain. And gas is different from oil because it tends to be more local in terms of links to the power sector and to industry, to feedstock for industry. So taking one example of a project that we executed in the north of Iraq in the Kurdistan region, we've invested over $1 billion. We've been producing gas now for over 10 years. We're about 400 million cubic feet per day, looking to take that up to 1 billion cubic feet per day in the next 3 years, actually. And we got PwC to do an assessment on what was the economic value add of this investment. And the interesting thing in terms of the points of displacing liquid fuels, in this case it was diesel, which would have been burnt in the power stations. But in other countries, Kuwait or Saudi, it's even crude oil. And the displacement of diesel saved over 30 million tons of CO2. And we expect to save over 80 million tons of CO2 in the next 10 years. So this is what people don't really think. They think, oh, fossil fuels, and as was heard this morning by Dr. Fatah, it's wrong to put them all in the same bucket. Plus that investment led to economic multiplier effects because you're providing electricity and therefore prosperity of up to $18 billion for the local GDP. Because it went from 2 hours electricity per day to almost total electricity per day. So that aspect of meeting energy access, which people forget, that's number 7 of the SDGs, right. And that's critical for the developing world. Sometimes the developed world, of course, climate change affects us all. But the developed world is like this, really fat man that's eaten so much and still eating, and saying to, this skinny young girl who's just started to grow, which is the developing world, from an energy basis, and saying, don't do what I did.
Yeah.
Okay? And we heard this morning, unless you create the incentives, you can't just say, don't do what I did. I mean, we heard from right. Fatah Bey, China and Asia is adding a new coal plant every week.
Right.
So there has to be, on a global level, the right incentives for the developing world to make that switch from coal to gas. And when it's a transition fuel in the sense that it's a fuel for the transition to a low carbon economy. I don't want people to think it's a transition in the sense that it's a bridge to get us to renewables. As the UAE has wisely targeted in 2050, it is a necessary complement to renewables, almost equal, 40%, 40% of renewables with natural gas. And it is going to remain an important complement for decades to come.
Majid, you brought up renewables, and Sajid, I want to turn to you on the question of renewables. Is it sometimes a competitor? Is it a partner? How do we think about renewables and gas in the transition?
Yeah, I think there is this notion that gas is somehow competing with renewables. But I believe that gas is absolutely not competing. Gas has got several uses. Fundamentally, where they overlap with renewables is on the power side. And one may argue whether there's a substitution question there. But gas has got, it's a feedstock, it's a fuel. It's got several other uses in terms of industrializing a country that it cannot be compared. Specifically to renewable energy, with the reduction in the price, the levelized cost of electricity in renewable energy, yes, the renewable energy has reached a stage where it is equivalent or even more competitive compared to gas, depending on the gas price in specific markets. So from that perspective, yes, renewable energy, when you're trying to add capacity into the grid, one may consider an option, a substitute, whether we should go with renewable or gas. That's the only time they would potentially, I would say, compete from a substitution perspective. But I would rather say that if you look at renewable energy integration into the grid in the longer term, it is absolutely necessary to have gas as part of the energy mix. Renewable energy cannot exist without a fundamental technology that provides the flexibility. And today, the flexibility, the best flexible option that renewable energy has in terms of covering the intermittency of renewable energy is gas, because you can switch on, switch off turbines with specific, and more turbines are being designed to be able to do that without having an adverse effect on its lifespan as well as O&M costs, etc. So going forward, I think renewable energy and gas should coexist and has to coexist as part of the energy mix.
Olivier?
Yeah, I think I agree with one maybe very long-term perspective, and I think the long-term perspective is that energy storage is most likely the solution to this intermittent and peak and trough of any energy source. And at present time, the gas in the next maybe 30, 50 years will act as a support partner to renewable. Long term, there might be, and there will be, certainly energy storage in the form of hydrogen, in the form of EV batteries and other means that could substitute and eliminate this form of low carbon substitution or complementary. But again, this is long term out. I think energy storage is not necessarily at scale and at economical value available today. So it's not something that will substitute or put out of whole the gas. And the gas, as was said, is clearly a feedstock to the industry. And there are other benefits, and one of them linked to the storage is that the techniques that are used for exploitation of gas also apply to carbon capture, sequestration, applying to hydrogen, applying to different techniques that will over time complement and be part of the energy mix. So investment in and at scale into gas today in MENA will prepare the long-term future of sustainability of energy, and I think it will be part of it, but not necessarily on the same mix in the next 20 years that it will be beyond.
Gerald?
Yeah, so I fully agree with the left-hand side over here, with all the speakers, as a matter of fact. I think there's no competition between gas and renewable energy. There may be sometimes in the sense of a substitution option, and that's good, because if we find in that competition cheaper, more affordable ways to develop gas, or if we find in that same competitive process more cheaper and better ways and more reliable ways to have renewable energy, it's good for everybody. But by and large, it's partnering, it is enabling. It's not about forever. A former minister said once, the Stone Age didn't end because of the stones. We run out of stones, and there comes a point where we will probably kind of have moved on from gas. But it's not the relevant discussion right now. And right now, gas can really power the society with affordable, low-cost energy in partnership with renewables. So I'm completely in agreement with that. I think there's the point beyond. We currently have 7 billion people on the planet, 7.5. It will be 9 billion people in 2050. I hope that many people will be able to afford the wealth which some of us already are able to afford, which means that the demand for building blocks in the chemical industry, the demand for all these products, which over and above the light and the cold and the television screens kind of allow us to sit here as well, will be on the increase. And I think gas will continue to have a role in that space as well.
Hey, Yuri, you just had a meeting at the International Renewable Energy Agency with the Director General. Is this the ultimate sign of partnership in terms of gas and renewables?
Mm-hmm. You're completely right. Of course, visiting this country, by the way, one of the key members of GCF, I used the unique opportunity and I paid a visit to the headquarters of the International Agency upon Renewables. We are cooperated, but very slightly and superficially before this meeting with the organization. But on the basis of this cooperation, the start of this cooperation, we analyzed the statutes of both entities, and we found that there are a lot of similarities in our statutes. More of that, I could like to say that our member countries at the same time are member countries of IRENA. Just these two factors, and there are a lot of others, we found that there's a fundamental basis to establish bridges with IRENA and to start cooperate practically. So that's why I dared to communicate with the Director General of IRENA, Francesca La Camera. We had a very productive and, from my point of view, promising meeting the day before yesterday, and we agreed to establish a joint working group upon the learning and studying opportunities in front of us and how to start cooperating, how to start joint research work on the basis of mutual funding, as well as we agreed to put forward some initiatives on the basis of the renewables of natural gas credentials. I'm talking about environmentally friendly character of natural gas and renewables. And if you don't mind, one step back, I'm talking about Egyptian case. It's of pivotal importance for GCF because Egypt is one of our key member countries founding GCF and participating very actively and efficiently in GCF activities. I would like to underscore that in spite of some temporary period for that country when the country ceased its natural gas export, the country kept loyalty to natural gas and continued its membership in GCF. So I would like to say that we are proud that our Egyptian colleagues, they were very loyal to natural gas, as already mentioned, and they were very determined in their efforts. They undertaken tremendous attempts and tremendous efforts, and due to that, we see such a huge result. The country came back and joined the club of natural gas exporters. I would like to stress specifically that this result is in line with the Egyptian government efforts to supply natural gas for domestic usage. And of course, this sample, this significance of great importance for us, and of course, we are deeply interested in continuing cooperating with the Egypt government in the relevant sphere.
And on the topic of sort of cooperation, I mean, what's the prospect for regional gas markets in the region?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Dr. Yuri, for that. Actually, to complement what I started and what I was talking about, and what the position that Egypt has reached now, I think when we thought of being now and to resume the exports, we thought, as we said, to have a more macro overview for the region. And the cooperation in that has started by saying we need to have a forum where we can underneath have this cooperation in order to make sure that we together complement each other. So we have some of the neighboring countries, let us say like Cyprus, it has got the gas but don't have enough market for the consumption and does not have currently the existing infrastructure that would able to develop and to monetize this gas and to get it processed through. So therefore, part of that was to have, for example, a connecting pipeline. And this was something that we've agreed together on. And this is a model where we are talking on optimizing with our current infrastructure, which is the LNG facilities and so forth. So this is from one side, as well as, let us say, the Arab gas pipeline that we had, and now we are using it to export gas to Jordan. So with the growing exploration and discovery in the region, we need to then use this basin of the East Mediterranean and perhaps growing more, because this is what we have seen recently from interested countries to join this forum. And then, as we said, more cooperation. But the last point that I need to just mention is that this will need to really review the investments and to use the technology to reduce the capex used, and then to be able to afford more and speedy development of gas. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I was given the 5-minute warning, which is now probably the 2-minute warning. And so I wanted to end on a final question and pick on one of the panelists. So I'm going to go with Majid. You brought up geopolitics, and you are a frequent commentator on geopolitics. And we spend a lot of time talking about the geopolitics of oil. Will we increasingly be talking about the geopolitics of gas? And what will be the most salient issues in 2 minutes?
So I think geopolitics is even more significant with gas, or more impactful, because oil is fungible and it can be stored, it can be transported, and it's a global commodity. With gas, we have the situation where we're importing LNG from the United States to this region, despite this region having much more gas and more cost-effective gas. So without going into all the details of the whys and the wherefores, that shows you what an impact that in addition to the policy aspects and the infrastructure aspects, geopolitics has been an impediment. And yet, in OPEC, you have an example where countries who are on opposite sides, sometimes of war, I mean, in the case of Iraq and Iran in the 80s, open war, are able to cooperate, and they're able to put aside the conflict and the geopolitics in favor of long-term energy, because gas in particular is typically 20+ year contracts, massive capital investment, and the way that's and in those 20-25 years, the alliances and the friendships and the animosities and the wars are all going to change and evolve, as we have seen looking back 25 years. So if there can be a way, and maybe it is through the gas exporting forum, where such partnerships are established separate from the short-term geopolitical tensions, I think that would really help. In addition to the necessary policy reforms that we heard, Egypt has undertaken, Abu Dhabi has undertaken, the UAE is kind of a role model also importing gas by LNG and pipeline, while prioritizing and reforming the regulatory regime to develop domestic resources in parallel. So all of that needs to happen. But if the geopolitics can be somewhat insulated, that will also help.
Well, this was an extraordinary session. I would like to thank this incredible panel and thank everyone for attending, and for the WEC for putting on this session. I bring this to a close. Enjoy your evening.